Hey y'all, it's Megan. Let's sew a primrose pattern. In this video, I'm doing a top length with a basic waistband, the color block lantern, and basic sleeve cuff. You need to cut one center front piece on the fold, two side front pieces, mirror images, one back piece on the fold. I am using a neckband in this video. You can also finish with a hood. I'm cutting one basic waistband on the fold, and I'm also doing the pocket in this version, so I have two pocket pieces. I do like to put a clip at the top edge of the pocket so I don't get it mixed up while I'm working. I am doing the color block sleeve, so I have two upper pieces on the fold, and make sure to mark those pleat markings. I like to use just little snips at the top. Also make sure to cut your notches. Then I have two bottom sleeve pieces. Again, make sure to cut the pleat markings, and you do want to mark the center fold. That is going to be another pleat marking. And then I have two basic sleeve cuffs on the fold. Let's go ahead and get started. Since I'm doing the pocket, that is going to be the first step. So you're going to take one pocket piece and put it right sides together, aligning the bottom and sides with your center front piece. And you're going to measure a 1/4 inch from the top edge on each side. And you need to mark this somehow with pins or clips or a marking pin. This is so you can finish the top edge of the pocket later. And you also need to cut little slits at the top edge of each pocket, a scant 1/2 inch, so we can sew the side pieces to the center front again in a later step. So once you have those marked, you're going to sew the pocket piece on each side to the front from the 1/4 inch marking on the top all the way to the bottom hem. You can use a serger for this step, but I like to use my sewing machine, so I make sure that I'm starting and stopping exactly in the right spot. And I like to use a longer triple stitch for this step. You can also just use your sewing machine for the top edges and then use the serger for the rest of the step. Once you have the pocket stitch, I do like to grade down that seam. Now, again, leave that 1/4 inch top so you can sew the pocket, and then press the pocket toward the wrong side. And then this is what your center front piece should look like. So above the pocket, you will have that little 1/2 inch snip, and it's just a scant 1/2 inch so you don't cut into your seam allowance. And then it's time to grab one side piece, put it right side up, and take the other pocket piece and put it right side down so they are facing right sides together. And we're going to attach the pocket the same way onto each side front piece. So I have marked a 1/4 inch from the top with that pin and clip, and then made a scant 1/2 inch snip, and then I'm going to sew that pocket piece to the side front piece. I forgot to mention that this is using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and it was a 1/2 inch seam allowance before as well. So you're going to sew this together again from the 1/4 inch marking all the way down. And you're not going to want to grade this seam down, but instead go ahead and press it toward the pocket piece. And then I like to understitch this seam so that the pocket does not peek out while you're wearing it from the side front piece. And I just use again a longer triple stitch for this under stitching step. And then you're going to give it a nice press. And then you're going to do the exact same thing with the other side piece. So you're going to take the same pocket piece, put it right sides together with the other side front piece, mark a 1/4 inch from the top, and again make that small little snip, and then sew them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance from that 1/4 inch mark all the way down to the hem. And then after, again, press the seam allowance toward the pocket, understitch the pocket, and then after you understitch, you can go ahead and grade that seam down by just trimming it so that your pocket seam isn't really bulky. Now we need to attach the center front piece to the side front pieces. So you're going to take the center front and with right sides together, you're going to match it to one side front piece. And this is going to be from the top of the pocket where you made your snip all the way to the top of the shoulder seam. And you're going to stitch these two together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I like to start with my sewing machine above the pocket because that can be a little tricky to get just perfect with your serger, and then I go back and finish the rest of the seam with my serger so I get a nice crisp pocket and pocket edge. So once that is attached, you can press the seam toward the center front, and this is what it will look like. And we're going to do the same thing with the other side front piece. You're going to take it and put it right sides together with the center front, and you're going to pin them together from that 1/2 inch snip all the way up to the shoulder seam, and you're going to stitch it together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Next, we need to sew the top edges of the pocket piece to finish the pocket. So you're going to make sure that the pocket is on the wrong side on each side, and you're going to clip them together at the top where we left that 1/4 inch edge, and you're going to stitch them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I also like to make sure the bottom is nice and straight, and then baste the bottom edge of the pocket together as well. I do like to use my sewing machine for this step, again, just so I get a nice clean pocket finish, but you can also use your serger. Just remember to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Then once your pocket is sewn together at the top and you get basted the bottom, I like to go back and on each top edge of the pocket where the pocket and the side and front bodice meet, I like to sew a bar tack on each side to reinforce that pocket. So when you put your hand inside, your little one doesn't accidentally just pull that pocket right out. And then this is what it should look like all finished. Next, you're going to put the back piece right sides together with your front, and you're going to stitch the two together along the top, creating the shoulder seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you can press the seam allowance toward the back bodice and set your bodice aside while we work on our sleeve. You're going to take your upper sleeve and put it right sides together with your lower sleeve, matching the notches and the raw edges. And we're going to stitch the two together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you're going to do this on both of your sleeve pieces. Now it's time to start pleating our sleeve. So each pleat is 3 markings. You're going to take the outside 2 markings and you're going to match them together so that that center marking is on the fold. So here it is again. I'm folding them right sides together, the 2 outside markings, and then that center marking is on the fold. And then you're going to stitch a straight line about 2 inches down along that first and third marking. So where that yellow pin is, just straight down. Now you can use a straight stitch, or I like to use a longer triple stitch if I'm going to leave my pleats permanent. I actually usually like to just baste the pleats so that they're only in the seam allowance and then pull the basting stitches out. This is just personal preference, however you want it to look. So I'm using a basting stitch here, as you can see, to sew my pleats. So I'm folding them together, that center marking is on the fold and I'm just stitching straight down and then leaving tail so I can pull that out later. And you're going to do the same thing on all 3 pleat markings. So you should have 2 on the top and then 1 on the bottom. Now, alternatively, if you don't want to do pleats, if for whatever reason you want maybe a different look or you don't want to do them, you can also just gather. So if you are doing the top and you don't want to do the pleats, then you would gather between the outside pleat markings, so all the way through the center notch. And if you want to gather the bottom, then I would go ahead and gather the entire bottom edge of your sleeve. Now you can do different kind of pleats. You can do a knife pleat, which would be just pressing the entire pleat towards one side, or if you flatten the pleat, which is what I'm doing here, it creates a box pleat. And you just baste along the top of the pleat so it holds it in place while you're sewing, and you're going to do the same thing on that bottom pleat. So you can see it's holding the pleats in place and looks nice. And I'm going to do the same thing on the bottom. And then after you're done, you're going to do the exact same thing on the other sleeve. And then you're going to give your sleeve a really nice press so it locks and holds all of those pleats in place while we're working on the rest of the top. And then it's time to attach the sleeve to the bodice. So I have the bodice out flat, and with right sides together, I'm going to match the center notch on the sleeve to the shoulder seam, and I'm going to pin them together. And then you will pin the front edge of the sleeve to the front edge of the bodice, and then ease the rest of the sleeve in place and do the same thing on the back sleeve. Match the back sleeve to the back bodice edge and then ease the rest in place, and you will stitch the sleeve to the bodice with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to repeat with the other sleeve and the other side of the bodice and do exactly the same thing. This is why you really want to baste those pleats, because if you don't, you may lose them completely when you sew this 1/2 inch seam. So make sure that you've basted your pleats on the top and on the bottom of the sleeve before you go stitch the sleeve on. If you basted your pleats like me, then you will go ahead and pull those basting stitches out once you're done attaching the sleeve, and that is what it will look like. And then it's time to sew the side seams. So you're going to take the front and back pieces and put them right sides together, and we're going to pin them together from the edge of the sleeve, matching all of the seams all the way to the bottom hemline. And then you're going to sew your front and back together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to repeat the same thing on the other side so both of your side seams are sewn. Next, you're going to sew your sleeve cuff. So fold them in half, right sides together, and then fold it in half again, wrong sides together, and stitch through all 4 layers with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both cuff pieces, and then turn them right side out and find the center of the cuff. Now I have my bodice wrong side out, and I'm going to slip the cuff inside, matching the side seam and the seam on the cuff, and I'm going to pin those together. And then I'm going to pin the center of the cuff to that center notch on, or center marking on your pleat, and then you're going to stretch the cuff to fit the sleeve. Now, if you're stretching your cuff and your sleeve is not fitting at all, or you're really having to pull really hard on your cuff for it to stretch, you can go back and just gather the edge of your sleeve a little bit, where in the places where that you don't have the pleat. So from the edge of the pleat all the way to the other edge of the pleat. Just gather it, and then that will help you fit it to the cuff. Once you have it pinned on and stretched to fit, you're going to stitch the cuff to the sleeve with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then repeat that process with the other cuff and the other seam. And then you will just pull those basting stitches out if you are like me and did a basting stitch on your pleat. And I'm so sorry, I didn't notice that my camera had fallen a little bit during this step, so you can't see it very well. Once you're done, I'm going to take my neckband piece and fold it in half, right sides together, and I'm going to stitch those short ends together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then refold the neckband down so you're enclosing the seam and you have the wrong sides together. And I'm going to go ahead and quarter my neckband piece and then also quarter my neckline. And then I have my bodice again wrong side out, and I'm going to slip the neckband inside, matching the quarter points. And then I'm going to stretch my neckband the rest of the way to fit. And I'm going to stitch the neckband to the bodice with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And once I have it stretched on, I'm going to give it a nice press. And then if you want to, you can press that seam toward the bodice and top stitch around the neckline. Now we're going to work on our waistband. So I have my waistband piece and I have it folded right sides together, and then I'm going to fold it again so the wrong sides are together just like we did on the sleeve cuff, and I'm going to stitch through all 4 of those layers with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you're going to flip your waistband right side out, and we're going to quarter both the waistband and the bottom edge of the bodice. Then you are going to put your waistband right sides together with the bottom of the bodice, and you're going to match those quarter points and stretch your waistband to fit the bodice, and then sew the two together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you can give it a nice press. And your primrose is complete. If you make one, as always, we would love to see them posted in our Facebook group or tag us on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag primrose pattern, hashtag Made for Mermaids patterns. If you have any questions, just leave them down below and I will try to answer. Thanks. Bye.